in terms of all the humans who are already now in crisis and all the species already now in crisis, and try to understand what that means. We're not just talking, however, and I really want to stress this, about parts of the world that we think of as being water stressed, like the 22 countries in Africa, like countries such as India, the countries that don't have water, like Australia in the first place. What we're finding now is that countries that have a lot of water but have abused their water are also in crisis. Just a couple of stats to start us off with. One is a new Greenpeace study that says that since 1990, over half the rivers in China have disappeared. They're gone. They don't know where they went. Well, they do know where some of them went. For the miracle of producing all the rubber duckies and shoes and everything, toys for the world, right? But also for hydroelectric power for their massive industrialization. India has just declared itself to be water stressed, they say, by between 2020 and 2025. They have admitted that this is a reality now, which means that they will not be able to supply their people with water. Well, we can tell you now that that's already here, but when countries are admitting that they're hitting the water wall and they can tell you when, we really know we're up against this. Brazil is the most important story in the world, in my opinion, because until very recently, people would say that, experts would say that Brazil probably had the most water in the world, any country. But we are hearing now, we know now, there are massive droughts, huge droughts in Brazil, and much of it in the south of Brazil. And you cannot blame traditional climate change on this. This is not traditional climate change as we've understood it with greenhouse gas emissions and the warming and so on. Yes, that's a piece of it. But what happened in Brazil is that they cut down the Amazon, or cut down much of the Amazon, not just that forest, but other massive rainforests. And these forests produce what are called flying rivers. And these flying rivers are currents that carry moisture with them. Thousands of kilometers away, and if you cut down the rainforest, the rain goes away. I mean, what we're learning now is that climate change is also created by the removal of water from water-retentive landscapes or vegetation from water-retentive landscapes. I'll come back to Brazil, but what is new information about the Dust Bowl is that it wasn't just that they removed the prairie grasses and the soil dried up and it blew away. Everyone knows that. They know that was what happened. Everybody also thought that at the same time there was coincidentally a terrible drought. And now new studies tell us no, what was actually a mild dry season became the crisis of those years because of the removal of the vegetation. That transformed and changed the rain patterns, and drought was a direct result of the removal of this vegetation. Back to Brazil, not only are they cutting down the rainforest, not only are these rivers, flying rivers not carrying water anymore, so that now Sao Paulo, which has about 20 million people depending on its water, is running out, they say, perhaps in a year. They have no idea what to do, literally no idea. And already in many of the poor areas, and even in the not so poor areas, you turn the water on, you may get 45 minutes of water from 5 to 6 in the morning, and you get 45 minutes of water from 10 to 11 at night. And that is not nice, clean, rushing water out of your tap. It's whatever you can gather, and that's the water that you've got. Not only are they doing that, but they're massively producing biofuels, sugarcane biofuel, which uses a huge amount of water. And they're now exporting this biofuel around the world, so they're pumping up their groundwater faster than it, of course, can be replenished. Brazil is the canary in the coal mine. It's the most important story for Canadians, in my opinion. We have the Ogallala Aquifer, that aquifer that goes down the spine of the United States. Is outside of California, is the red basket for the United States and exports massive amounts of food. It used to be hard scrabble prairie, but then in the 50s they discovered these bore wells, this bore well technology, and they were able to pump up the groundwater so amazingly that they turned this desert into basically an oasis. But it's declining so quickly that 2 years ago the Department of Agriculture in the United States said the Ogallala Aquifer will be gone within, they said, 40 to 60 years. They don't see any way to stop it. They say the decline is absolute. There are 200,000 bore wells going 24/7, and they say that the exponential destruction is here. California had enough water. California has enough water. California has decided, as they say there, to allow water to run uphill to money. And so the 80% of the almonds in the world are produced in California, which is these water guzzling products. You know, and then places like Las Vegas and so on, they've just come to an absolute halt. So it's very important for us to understand that this is happening very quickly in the world. It's documented in many places. It stuns me that we still have, for instance, a presidential election coming up in the United States, and you will hear lots of talk about energy, but you will hear, I predict, I hope I'm wrong, there will be no debate about water in the presidential election coming up. And it's just like, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. I don't want to know about it. Now, at the same time, of course, we have the reality of people, of humans, and the lack of justice. Bob talked about the work that I and many others have done on the issue of water injustice. There's a fairly recent report that says that a World Health Organization report that says that every 3.5 seconds, somewhere in the global south, a child dies of waterborne disease. It is singly the largest killer of children, kills more children than all forms of violence, including war, and is absolutely something that we can fix if we were to put our minds to it as, you know, internationally as a human species. I will tell you a good story about that, and that is that in this coming Wednesday, the 28th of July, will be the 5th anniversary of the United Nations General Assembly recognizing the human rights to water and sanitation. I was there. It was an extremely moving moment. It had to go to a vote. It wasn't unanimous. We had a lot of powerful countries, certainly all sorts of organizations and institutions like the World Bank. All of these were so opposed. The big water companies, the big utilities, the big bulk water companies, all working quietly against it, right? Canada led the fight against the human right to water at the UN. And I was, as Bob said, advising the President of the United Nations General Assembly that year. I was mortified when people would say, can you just get your government to change its mind? And I'd say, yeah, right, this weekend I'll just wake up and tell Mr. Harper to slap him around and get his act together on this, yeah, for sure. So it had to come to a vote, and when they vote in the United Nations General Assembly, they vote from their seats, and so it goes up like on a huge electronic board. And I was standing there with some of my staff in tears, and I wasn't, but they were, because they thought we were going to lose. I thought we were going to lose, and I said, don't you worry, it's so amazing to be here. We'll be back in 5 years, 10 years, we'll get this. And I don't know how wrong I was. They voted, and 122 countries voted in favor. Ding, 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 ding. It was just like we were stunned. Not one country voted against. 42 abstained, including Canada. But not one country had the guts to do this. And I will never forget, I was standing in the balcony with a guy named Pablo Somo, who was the ambassador from Bolivia, who introduced this resolution. And he was standing in the balcony, and one after another after the vote, these ambassadors turned to him and lectured him. You know, you pushed this too hard, we needed more research. What research? What more research, right? Anyway, lectured him, and Pablo stood there with this big shit-eating grin on his face, as if to say, and what part of I just won and you didn't, do you not get? Like, this is just like a piece of pure magic, but it's very exciting. I'm writing a report right now on what has happened in those 5 years, and there have been some huge success stories, including a number of countries that have changed their constitution to recognize the human right to water, countries that have set out a plan of action to deliver water. It was a very important moment, and in my opinion, the human species kind of took a step forward, if you will, on that particular day. But I have to tell you that this issue of the human right to water is not one that's far away anymore. With a deadly combination of growing inequality in the so-called first world, right, and water prices going up, we're finding cutoffs and lack of the right to water in so-called first world countries too. I've been deeply involved in the situation in Detroit. You've probably read about it, where they've been cutting off the water to thousands and thousands of families because they can't pay. Well, they can't pay because all the rich people left Detroit, left the poorest people behind, mostly African Americans. Then they tripled the price of water and said, oh, if you can't pay, we're going to cut your water off. By the way, that's against the Convention on the Human Right to Water. You're not allowed to remove a right that has already been ceded or granted. But Baltimore, Boston, it's happening all over the U.S. With the austerity agenda in Europe, there have been thousands of cutoffs in Greece, in Italy, in Spain, where they have terribly high unemployment and people can't pay their water bills, they're cut off. So it's not just a faraway problem anymore, and I want to say to you that this is an equalizing kind of situation, this human right to water. As water becomes more scarce, as water becomes more corporately controlled and privatized, as the water rates go up, you're going to find those same fights happening in communities near you. So where are we in our lovely country called Canada? Well, you know there's a terrible drought going on right now in British Columbia, in Alberta, and Saskatchewan. I smiled there the other day. They're having these talks on the Trans-Pacific Partnership right now. They're down to the wire in Hawaii. And Stephen Harper is the Conservative trying very, very hard to hold off this debate because Canada's being told if you don't give away your supply management for eggs, poultry, and dairy, you're going to be kicked out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And he will do that in a heartbeat, but he doesn't want to do that before the election, right? So he's just trying to keep things sort of on hold. But anyway, there was this tome in the Globe, I guess, yesterday saying how wonderful the Trans-Pacific Partnership is. We should give away those quotas. And the beef farmers are all so excited because it's going to open up Japan's market. And I thought, wait a minute, in the same paper, you have a whole other story about how they're having to kill their cattle, or how they're selling their cattle, or how they're having to truck water in for their cattle because they're in a drought situation. It's as if the people working in trade, or the people working in agribusiness, or the people working in energy don't talk to anybody in the environment. Oh, wait, they fired them all. I forgot. They fired 2,000 scientists. They fired all the water scientists. I forgot that. But even when they were working there, nobody talks to them. Nobody asks, is it sustainable to have these free trade agreements? Is it sustainable to promise a huge new quota of pork and beef to Europe under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement when we don't have the water to provide for the beef and pork that we're growing now? It's just these questions don't get asked, and everybody today has said in one way or another, Colleen and everyone, we need a new water ethic that puts water at the very center of everything we do, and it's as far away as it can be. David Schindler, the wonderful freshwater scientist from Alberta originally, or from the States originally to Alberta, now in BC, has warned us that and it says clearly over and over, this is more than just climate change as we've understood it. The Great Lakes are in terrible trouble. I live closer to the Great Lakes and I live to Lake Winnipeg, so I've been, watching them very closely. Between the receding water, the eutrophication coming back, I'm afraid, to Lake Erie, when we thought we had beaten it, to invasive species, to multi-point pollution, and now, and I've written a report on this if anybody wants to read more about it becoming a carbon corridor for extreme energy. We're just treating the Great Lakes like a great big carbon dump, and a pollution dump, and a great big business adventure for all. I'm not going to go into the story on Lake Winnipeg. You know the story. You need to read Bob's book. But just to remind us that in 2013, the Global Nature Fund said that it was the most threatened lake of the year, and they meant globally. And this, we know, of course, is from eutrophication, from nutrient overload. A medium-sized factory farm can easily produce as much phosphorus as a mid-sized city, but of course without the pollution controls, without the without the safeguards and work that's done to clean our municipal garbage, our municipal waste. Schindler says that our mismanagement of land and water is creating what he calls an algal bowl that is going to be as deadly to all of us as the Dust Bowl was in the 1930s, and probably to the same areas. So a really powerful warning that this drying of the prairie lands here in Canada and the United States are coming, and they're coming very hard. So we in Canada and we in Manitoba are not immune to the issues that I've been talking about, whether it's China or Brazil or Australia or you name it. They are here. These issues are here. And Schindler and others are telling us that this drought is not a one-year thing, that we are in for a very long haul. We have, as I said earlier, this myth of abundance. We also have a way of looking at water in the modern world. In a way, a colleague, Jamie Linton, calls modern water. He wrote a really interesting book called What is Water? And he said water is what you make of it at any particular time. It's culturally defined. In most Aboriginal, Indigenous communities, water is sacred. There are ceremonies around water. Water is precious. Water is what gives us life. It's recognized. But in our sophisticated modern world, water is a resource. It's a resource for our pleasure and our profit, and we do whatever we want with it. We dump whatever we want to do it. We move it from where it's been put, where it's needed, and this is one of the rules, is just leave that water. We talked earlier this morning about leaving the oil in the soil. Leave the water in the ground. We need to leave water where it belongs. Another study on global groundwater taking said that we are doubling groundwater takings every 20 years. We are taking up tomorrow's groundwater. We're also dumping amazing amounts of pollution into it. In the United States, it is legal to dump all forms of toxic poison into groundwater. And I remember a couple of years ago, they found a new aquifer under the city of Mexico, which they desperately need. Because Mexico's sinking on itself. You know, if you go there, you'll see the cathedrals kind of tipping on their side. That's called subsidence, when you take up all the water under these cities or this land mass, they start to sink. So they needed this water, right? It's not a huge amount, but it's water. And the engineer, when they brought the very first cup of this water up, this ancient, beautiful water, he drank it and he turned to the media and he said, "This is why you don't pollute your groundwater, because you will need it one day." You know, this is the lesson that we're learning, that we don't think about what happens after groundwater, after surface water gets polluted, and then what happens to our groundwater. In my book, I've got a newish book called Blue Future, and in it I quote one of the advisors to the Hoover Dam, when they were building the Hoover Dam, and he said, "When America learns to conquer its water, it will be great." This notion of conquering water, conquering nature, getting nature to do its bidding, this is incredibly important. So we in Canada, with this wealth of water, with water as part of our heritage, as part of our music and our stories and our art, we take pathetic care of our water. It's not just Lake Winnipeg. We do not care for our water. I mean, go to Prince Edward Island, where there's a big fight now about whether they're going to be allowed more deep wells so the potato farmers can dig more water up, using more nitrogen, so more nitrogen pollution. And you know why? Because they need to grow a certain kind of potato so that when it goes to Wendy's or McDonald's or whatever, it's the long kind, and it has to be grown to a specific size and shape so that it's easily made into French fries. You couldn't make that up, could you? This is what we're doing to our water across the country. Name me the province and I'll tell you the problem. We have an old, ineffective, outdated Water Act. We have no national drinking water standards. We're the only OECD country not to have drinking water standards. We do not map our groundwater, so we don't know how sustainable it is or our use of it. And the Harper government, I just want to say this, my organization, the Council of Canadians, is nonpartisan. We do, however, feel we have the right to judge a government by its actions. So when I speak of what Harper has done, it's not his political affiliation. I have my own views on that, but that's not what we're here for, right? we're here, but we need to understand that not only is he not enforced the existing laws that we had, he gutted the three most important environmental water laws that we had. The Fisheries Act, the Environmental Protection Act, Assessment Act, and the Navigable Waters Protection Act. Now 99% of all of our lakes and rivers in this country are totally unprotected by any federal legislation at all. Any pipeline carrying any toxic extreme energy, fracking wastewater, bitumen laced with chemicals, you name it, can go under, over, or around our lakes and rivers. And the only ones that were protected were mostly in conservative ridings, and there's actually a map that can show you that. And as I say, they have laid off so many of the scientists, laid off and shut down so many of the research institutes to deal with water. I have a compendium of them, and it's this thick. And we fought very hard to stop the shutting off of the ELA, the Experimental Lakes Area, which thank goodness the ISD picked up, but should be still back under government hands. And it was not because it cost money. It's because they were coming close to finding information on what the tar sands or the oil sands, depending on what you want to call them. There's a great play called Watershed, and this oil industry person says to the playwright in the play, she said, "Look, I don't care what you call it, but you got to learn if you say, people who say oil sands are for them, people who say tar sands are against them." So the playwright says, "Okay, I'll get that." So it's very, I thought it was actually quite funny because I say tar sands. But this is all in response to the energy industry in Canada, and we know this because Greenpeace got a hold through Freedom of Information of a document, a letter from the energy lobby to the Harbour government naming those three pieces of legislation and saying they have to go. And of course, the National Energy Board has had its powers gutted, which we've been fighting for years. And so now we have the premiers getting together last week in St. John's, agreeing to the so-called National Energy Strategy, which sounds like a go-ahead for Energy East. And let me tell you about Energy East. Energy East pipeline will take a 40 to 60-year-old gas pipeline from Hardisty, Alberta to Cornwall. And once it gets to Cornwall, they'll start to build a new one. But until then, it's a pipeline that should be retired. It should not be used for anything, even the gas it's carrying now. And it will take 1.1 million barrels of diluted bitumen diluted with chemicals like toluene and benzene to make them liquefied enough to move through the pipes across over 1,000 waterways. If you'd like to read that report too, that's on our website. We did a report where we took the map of Canada, all the waterways, and then the route of Energy East. And it's not only going to cross major bodies of water, like cross right under the St. Lawrence, but it's going to, it crosses right under the aquifer that feeds the city of Winnipeg, its drinking water. 2 meters under the aquifer, the aqueduct that takes water from Shoal Lake, that's been doing that for 100 years. If that bursts under that aqueduct, the water from Winnipeg, the entire region will be absolutely devastated, absolutely spoiled. We stood on the water treatment plant, brand new state-of-the-art water treatment plant in North Bay, because the Energy East would go right by it. They showed us. We stood at this huge window and they said, "There's Trout Lake, there's the gas pipeline that will be converted." And we said to the guy, the head of the manager of the treatment plant, "Well, what will happen if there's a bitumen spill?" He said, "Well, there, as you can see the stream, and this is the intake valve, and this is where it'll hit the intake system, and then it'll clog it up immediately for, we don't know, maybe always." And we said, "Well, what's the plan?" And he said, "No plan, no plan. This is a state-of-the-art treatment center in North Bay." So we know not only are we not taking care of our water, not only are we gutting our water, but we are allowing this all in the name of becoming an energy superpower, when we know that we have to be converting, not immediately, not tomorrow. I'm not stupid, I know that's not going to happen, but we have to be converting, and building these pipelines, and that one, by the way, is 90% an export pipeline, so it's bringing very few jobs, not picking up anybody else's energy as it goes through. It's just to go to deep water ships, barges off from St. John, New Brunswick, and maybe some on the St. Lawrence, and be shipped out, maybe down to refineries in the US and some overseas. So I'm happy with the situation, and I would love this to be an election issue. I don't hear much from the other parties either yet on this water issue, and I think it's a sure winner, I really do. You know, that's one thing that we can do. But I'm going to talk very briefly about what I think are the solutions, and then I'd just love to talk with you together. I and others, Bob and others, are talking about the need for a new water ethic, and by that we mean that we need to be aware of water with all our policies, with everything we do. And we mustn't just talk about it in terms of individuals. I was at a lovely event not long ago with a whole group of local women in a smallish community, not unlike this. And everybody broke up into groups, and it was about microplastics in the Great Lakes, because this is a community on Lake Huron. And every single woman in the group, when we reported back, talked about what she could do, what she could teach her family, and so on. And it got to me, and I said, do you realize that not one of you, there were maybe 35 women in the room, not one of you mentioned what government should be doing. It was like, did we give up on governments? Have we just decided, okay, they're not going to do anything, we'll do it all ourselves? And don't get me wrong, everything, the activist work is fabulous. Do not misunderstand, but you know, and you're working with government. Martin Luther King said, legislation may not change the heart, but it will restrain the heartless. Legislation may not change the heart, but it will restrain the heartless. We need the rule of law. When we believe something, we pass a law about it. You can't go out and drink and drive and say, oh, as a volunteer, I'll stop doing that, right? We have laws. When you mean something, you pass a law. And if we don't want to pollute our water, then we have to bring laws in to protect our water. And that means this water ethic would say, if we're negotiating a trade agreement, let's look at the impact of this trade agreement on the environment. Do you know that corporations from other countries can now sue if they were using your water in their production and for some reason stopped? We have a precedent where a company named Abitibi-Water, a pulp and paper company, was operating for decades in Newfoundland. They went bankrupt, and the way these companies do, they turn around and got their creditors to take all the debt, turned around, called them something else, I forget the new name. Anyway, they left, and they left the jobs, and they left the pensions. They said, sorry, we're bankrupt, we can't pay pensions. Then they turned around and they said to the province, oh, and could you pay us for the water rights we left behind? And Danny Williams was the premier then and told them where they could put that little ocean right. So they launched a Chapter 11 challenge under NAFTA, because corporations are allowed to directly sue the government of another country if they feel that they have a case. And without even going to a NAFTA panel, the Harper government turned around and gave them $130 million. So we now have a precedent where a government has given a foreign company money because they left and abandoned their so-called water rights. Nobody asked them to do it. They left on their own. So we've moved a step beyond corporations having the right to say you can't raise fees, or if Alberta were to say to the energy companies, you have to cut your water use in half, you have to clean up your water, they'd all have to do it, but the American-based companies would have the right to sue for financial compensation, millions, potentially billions of dollars. Do we ask those questions when we have these trade agreements? No. What about growing food? How would we grow food differently if we cared about water? Totally different. Energy, would we have biofuels? No, we would not. It takes 1,700 liters to produce 1 liter of corn ethanol. It's not worth it. I call it air versus water. It's simply not worth. It's not worth the use to water. Fracking. Would we get fracked? Would we use gas if we understood what it's doing to water? So deeply thinking about water in every way. And I would then just add that it would be based on 3 principles. The first is that water is a human right. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but this notion that it's coming to a community near us, I promise you this is true. We already, as I said, have seen it in the US and Europe. In our country, if you are living in a First Nations community, you're 90% more likely not to have clean water and sanitation than other Canadians. So that is the human right issue on water for us in our country. But it's also a human rights issue. If the water that you need to depend on to drink is being polluted, we now have a right under the UN to start to challenge that. And I would really like us to start thinking about ways in which we can do it. We also need to see water as a public trust and a commons. And this is what Bob was talking about when he introduced me, and that is the race for the corporate grab of water. Some of these big companies saw a long time before any of us that a world running out of water is going to be one in which those who find a way to control it and own it are going to be very powerful and they're going to be very rich. And so you have powerful municipal utilities making money. You now have water trading, literally trading. You have, of course, the massive bottled water industry. If you were to put all the single-use plastic bottles of water that we used in the world last year, end to end, they would reach to the moon and back 75 times. You just stop and think, you want to talk about plastics in our water systems? I mean, most of these, about 35%, do not get recycled in Canada. And that's a good stat. There are places where almost none get recycled. So public control of water, that water is a public trust. Governments have a right to control and fiercely manage this commons on behalf of the people and the future. And if any industry or any company has access to this water, it has to demonstrate it's going to be a good steward. You pollute it, you use more than you said you would, you're cut off. We don't do that. We just give these companies whatever they want. In my province, Ontario, the bottled water companies get their water for $3.71 for 1 million liters. And then turn around and you can imagine how much they sell it for. Finally, water has rights too, and I want to really stress this one. This is kind of a new movement around the rights of nature. There's a Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth, which you can also get on our website, Canadians.org, which is just a beautiful document. It came out of a gathering in Bolivia after the failure of Copenhagen, the big summit that was supposed to be the one that was going to make everything fine. Copenhagen was horrible, I was there. They were abusive, they let police in from all over Europe. It was awful. It was brought to you by Coca-Cola, I'm not kidding you. It was the UN summit and UN and Coca-Cola putting on the summit. When you got off the plane, they had these little elves in red, dressed in red with little cups of Coca-Cola welcoming you to, are you ready? Copenhagen, isn't that cute? Copenhagen. I started calling it Copenhagen because everywhere we went, there were ads of pretty children running through fields, drinking Coke. So, and then it was just abusive and horrible. And then I remember when I left, there was another little elf with red, dressed in red, wanted to give me some more Coke to say goodbye. And I'm afraid I used the F-bomb on the little sword. Really feel bad. I'd like to go back and find it. What is this notion that water has rights? So the president of Bolivia called, said, okay, that failed, brought us all a whole bunch of this to Bolivia, Cochinamba. He said, I think they expected 3,000 or 4,000, 38,000 of us to sit on Bolivia. It was madness. And out of that came this People's Declaration that the earth has rights too. And then we have to start understanding that rivers have the right to flow and species have the right not to be hunted and fished and poisoned to extinction, and that we need to change our human laws to become more compatible with the laws of nature. We have to start doing that soon. And that means deep watershed protection and watershed restoration. That means retention, that means water retentive landscapes have to be not only protected but restored. Massive projects of water restoration, watershed restoration are happening around the world, but that also requires generally watershed governance. So you stop thinking what is my country's value from this piece of water, and you start asking, what's the benefit to the watershed? How can we together protect this watershed? What do we need to give up to protect this watershed? What are the needs of the watershed instead of how much can I take? And that's how most countries approach it now. And the notion of what your project here, and I just want to say, Mayor Gray, where are you? This is very, very exciting project, and I think I'm going to visit it this afternoon, and I'm very excited about it. I want to tell you about a similar one that I visited in a place called Salisbury in South Australia. A few years ago, in that terrible drought, the Murray-Darling stopped reaching the stopped reaching the ocean. And Adelaide, huge city there, and other cities and communities were out of water. And there were these turtles, these beautiful turtles that were dying. And so I have a T-shirt that says, "Hurry, hurry, save the Murray," and with the pictures of the kids, saving the turtles and so on. And so Adelaide's answer was 2 massive desalination plants. Dirty, expensive, energy producing, toxic waste producing. And right next to it is a city called Salisbury, and a guy named Colin Pittman, and I really like those of you involved in this project to read about him, convinced his municipality to let him try something different, and he has dozens and dozens of wetlands and lagoons that they've built with the kind of plant life that eats pollution and that retains water, and they started rainwater harvesting, stormwater, and wastewater, cleaning and harvesting and so on. They have so much water that people come, it's like an oasis. They're selling it to Adelaide. They have water trading there, I don't approve, but anyway, they're now selling it to Adelaide. They have hundreds of bird species have come back. People have come from all over the world to learn how they have done this. We can do it when we know how to do it. The great Victorian poet Gerard Manley Hopkins said, "There's a deep dearness down in nature." There's a deep dearness down in nature. Nature will come back when we stop when we stop playing it with our poison. But and I think about Lake Winnipeg, Robert Stanford says it will be, if we don't do something now, it will be like living on an open sewer. We absolutely have to do this, and we know we can do it, and we know it's been done other places. I want to just end by really thanking you all very much. Get involved in the projects like Friendly Aquavisi and Lake Friendly. Let me tell you briefly, quickly about another lovely concept that we've started with the Canadian Union of Public Employees called Blue Communities. And a blue community is where a municipality decides to become blue, and they promise to protect water as a human right, a public trust, and that they'll promote public water over bottled water. And we have dozens of communities around the country, a lot in Ontario. We started it in other countries. I was down in a place called Cambuquira, Brazil last year, because Nestle came into, it's an area with wonderful healing mineral waters. Nestle came into another little town. They bought the water and they destroyed it. So all these communities are saying, we're a blue community, we don't want you here. Switzerland, which is the home of Nestle, Bern has become a blue community. The university there became a blue community. The major church became a blue community. One of the major unions became a blue community. I'm going back because I think Zurich's going to become a blue community this fall. And it's a way of getting out ahead of what politically saying that it's not just that we are worried about this, but we're going to take commitments. And you could include, I could see becoming a blue community here. I could see that you could wrap not only your protection and your promise around Lake Winnipeg, but the project that you're working on here as part of the solution, because it's, we need those and we need that hope. So I just want to leave you with the quote by the great Carl Sagan. He was an environmental scientist. I don't know if any of you used to watch his program, but he would talk about, he loved nature. He'd talk about billions and billions of stars. He would just make you weep, right? And he said, anything you want, he would say, anything you want to do, you can't do if you can't breathe the air or drink the water. But think of it as being a gift that you're alive at this point in time. It is a gift to be here. here, when we have this mandate, when we have this threat and challenge, when we have this calling. And don't sit it out, do something. Become a steward, become a water warrior. We need to do this, and we need to do it together. Thank you so much. Take questions if you want, so it's up to you guys. Or comments. I love comments too.
Thank you very much. I'd like to know your comments, your thinking on Pope Francis' speaking about the environment and how it fits in with what your passion is.
I am in love with Pope Francis. I love this man, and I'm not religious particularly, so that's not on a religious basis, but he represents to me what he wants to, what the church should represent, which is compassion, vision, a commitment to the poor. I mean, he's wonderful, and I think that he's given a whole new opening, a whole new door to us. He says, look, the scientists are finished. They know. We don't, yes, of course, more research. Don't stop research, but don't wait for more research to know that it's here, right? But there's a moral place. There's a place for a moral discussion. There's a place for an ethical discussion. And I deeply agree with that on water. I mean, I can remember before I got wacky about water, I never thought about it. Water, I took it totally and completely for granted, and now I am passionate about it. I feel hurt when it's hurt, like it's personal, and that's not science. It's rational or irrational, or rational and irrational at the same time. There's a deep bond that we humans have to nature, and the beauty of the water issue, and Pope understands this, is it binds people in a way that many other issues don't. I remember once asking somebody who fought the army, this was back in Bolivia when they had a water war revolution, because the government the World Bank said, if you want funding for water, you have to bring in a private company. So the company came in, not only did they triple the price of water, one of the poorest countries in the world, they said, we own the water that comes from the sky. And we're going to send inspectors around. If you're catching rainwater, we're going to charge you for it. So there was a revolution, and the army was brought in, and people were killed, but the people won. And I remember asking the leader, a shoemaker who'd never been outside of his little community before, asking him, Oscar, why water? And he said, it's because, he said, I would rather die of a bullet to the head than die of thirst. I'd rather see my child die that way than to see them die of waterborne disease. The water issue is one that connects us as humans all across the world. I see water as nature's gift to humanity to teach us how to live more nicely with each other. Water is very much a part of all of the struggles in the Middle East, for instance, and could be part of the answer if we can see it that way. So thank you for asking that. My husband wonders if people really come voluntarily here. I don't know, we just don't have anything to say. They're crazy.
Question over here.
So I guess probably you and everybody in here believes that what Al Gore said 2 weeks ago, that political will is a renewable resource.
Political will?
Is a renewable resource.
That's lovely. I was out of the country, so I didn't hear. Political will is a renewable resource. You must have hope. I mean, hope is a moral imperative. I believe that with my heart. And when I speak to young people, I cut the bad stuff out a lot. Just give some of the straight facts and talk about what people can do, because I fear that we can be debilitating to young people. It's like, oh my God, I may as well just go watch videos and take drugs and stuff, because what else? it's just so overwhelming. But when we empower ourselves and we empower young people and we say it's not you instead of us, it's us together, we can remove that political will. And besides, we have the right to demand good government. I'm sorry, I haven't given up on the notion that we have the right to get government. We do have an election coming now, that we do indeed, and I really hope that, well, to say one very strong thing that we're doing around youth vote. We're the Council of Canadians, and anybody who isn't a member, we'd love to have you. We're non-partisan, non-profit. Go to our website, canadians.org. But we have a project to get people to vote, because in the last election we had the lowest voter turnout, as you know, in history. And the youth between the ages of 18 and 25, only 39% of them voted. So we've got a whole project on campuses, and we have Richard Papp, you know, the young, she was the Senate page who held up the Stop Harper sign. She's going out to universities and working with a number of campuses with young workers and so on to get the vote out, just saying to people you have to vote. But we've also taken the government to court over its Fair Elections Act. Now, just to roll, do you want to hear this little story? It's not necessarily about water. So you'll remember in the 2011 election, there were a lot of roll calls telling people to go to non-existent voting booths. So we, with plaintiffs from 6 ridings, launched a challenge, because these people in these 6 ridings said, we don't feel that the election in our riding was fair. They were all really close, and a few votes one way or the other would have made a difference. So in this particular ride, in these ridings, we wanted them overturned. It went to the Federal Court of Canada. The Federal Court did not overturn them, but it said that voter fraud took place in the 2011 election. It was, and I quote, widespread, and probably impacted the outcome of the election. And they also said, the court also said, the fault lies probably at the feet of the Conservative Party of Canada. Now that's a pretty tough indictment, right? So there was an outcry to the government saying you have to do something so that this doesn't happen again. So their answer was the so-called Fair Elections Act. Now the Fair Elections Act not only removes all sorts of power, not only didn't give the Chief Electoral Officer and the Electoral Commissioner more power and more authority and more inspectors to go out and uncover the cases, because they said at the time, we can't follow up on this, we don't have the person power. But they removed their power, and now they report to not to Parliament anymore, but to Cabinet, which is a politicization of our electoral process. So we've laid with Canadian Federation of Students, we've laid a charter challenge on this. But the challenge isn't coming up till after the election, so we went to court a few weeks ago to get an injunction to at least allow people to use their voter identification card, which they were allowed to use in the last election, and 400,000 people did use it with one other piece of identification. The new law says that you can't use that voter information card as identification. You have to have something with a driver's license, either like a driver's license with your address and photo, or something with a photo and something with your address. Now for thousands and thousands of students away from home, they don't have that. Lots of people in First Nations don't have individual addresses, it's the First Nation address, so they have their chief or whatever vouch for each of them, all that's gone. We had one of the leading experts in Canada, Harry Neufeld, say that tens of thousands of Canadians will not vote in this election. And unfortunately, the judge just last week said, well, I agree with you on the facts. I think that it's true that people are not going to be able to vote, but I don't feel I have the power to overturn this piece of legislation. So we are going to find fewer people voting this election unless we can convince people that they have to move heaven and earth to get to that voting booth, because in my opinion, it's a very important election coming up. And if you want to read, let me tell you some things to read on our website. I wrote a report on the Harper legacy and agenda on water. It's called Blue Betrayal. I wrote another one called Broken Covenant on 10 sectors of where they've gone after democracy and women and environmental groups and so on. And then we have another report called Liquid Pipeline, and that's on the carbon corridor and its threat to water. So please go to our website, avail yourself of this, learn about CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with Europe, which is a terrible agreement, which we can't get anybody to talk about. You know, we're a family here in Canada, and we have to support each other. And I'll end with just my favorite saying from a 96-year-old friend. She says, whenever any of us get down, feel overwhelmed, she says, you know, fighting for justice, she's fought for justice all her life. She says, fighting for justice isn't a fashion you put on and off. It's a commitment you make. You do it every day. And then she said, ooh, fighting for justice is like taking a bath. You do it every day or you stink.